All right, welcome back to the channel, everybody. I wanted to do some stuff on Bill Russell. Um, it seems like a lot of people in the comments know quite a bit more than I do about Bill. So it's time we learn a little bit, and let's learn it through SCAP. So we're gonna see who owned in the NBA in the 60s, the Clash of Titans. So this should be covering a lot of Will Chamberlain versus Bill Russell. Yeah, let's learn together.
For some reason, we as a sports watching society seem incapable of just appreciating greatness, perpetually caught up in the never-ending rush to anoint someone the next, the best, the greatest. And as that conversation pertains to the NBA, perhaps no individual sport has such a diverse and varied amount of answers to the question of who is the greatest player of all time. And fundamentally, the answer to that question lies with each individual person and with what metrics they hold to be most valuable. The consensus answer for the better part of 3 decades, and yes, still overwhelmingly believed to be the sport's all-time GOAT, Michael Jordan, holds that designation not because he was the greatest winner, not because he was the most individually statistically dominant, and certainly not because his bulk statistical accumulation met the gaudy totals of other all-time greats who played substantially longer than he did. No, Jordan is still universally considered the declarative answer to that question of who the greatest is, because he represents.
Yeah, see, coming into this and the view I've always had, I mean, I know Bill Russell's records. Um, I know, how many rings he's got. So I came into this always calling Bill Russell the greatest winner of all time. Jordan is the GOAT as far as like the greatest basketball player of all time. And then LeBron these days, I just give him the longevity award, the longest lasting basketball player of all time.
The greatest total package in basketball history. His unique combination of aesthetically pleasing aerial assaults, coupled with the skill, the will, the defense, and above all, most
Yeah, he
importantly,
had it
the
all.
winning, during the compact amount of time he played in the league, was higher than anyone we had seen before or since. Of course, we are talking about this premise of one's peak, but perhaps the better way to establish this peak dominance, though, is to determine how great an individual player was compared to their peers. How forcefully did they reign over their generation of players? And most typically, professional basketball has been broken down into eras. But when and where does an era begin and end? Well, the cleanest and most precise way to break these eras up is by decade. And generally, the individuals who owned each decade, beginning in the 1960s and running all the way until today, are generally the individuals most commonly found in these top 10 conversations and GOAT
In my
debates.
shoes.
But who are the GOATs of each decade? And how thoroughly did they dominate their specific eras? In order to determine the greatest players of all time, join me for an in-depth 7-part series breaking down each decade, starting with the 1960s.
Let's
And
do
in
it.
this decade, Will Chamberlain dominated from a statistical standpoint like no other player did in any decade ever, and it isn't close. His 24,719 points during this 10-year span are the most in NBA history, and his 34-point-per-game scoring average is also the
Jesus.
most ever. But
That was the highest scoring era in basketball history, but still 34 is ridiculous. I'm pretty sure this is going to go down as Will Chamberlain is the best individual player, but he lost a lot. So he's kind of like LeBron, you know, like great individual wise, but not a good winner. He didn't get the job done. And yeah, Bill Russell was not as individually dominant, statistically wise, but by far the better winner.
as
Job done.
dominant as Chamberlain was statistically, he wasn't in a class of his own in this category, as the Big O, Oscar Robertson, also
Oh
rose to
yeah, Big
prominence
O.
during the 60s. And there's a reason he earned the moniker Mr. Triple-Double, with decade averages of 29 points per game, 10 assists, and 8.5 rebounds.
That's sick. That's sick. Yep. Well, ladies and gentlemen, before we had Russell Westbrook, we had
And overall, the decade of the 1960s was just on one from a statistical standpoint due to out-of-this-world pace of play and nightly scoring averages not seen since in the entire history of basketball until, well, today. Average nightly league scoring for that 10-year span was 115 points per game, which is by far the highest scoring and fastest paced decade
we're right
ever,
there.
with the
We're right
only
there
time
again.
coming even close to that being our current NBA, which has seen league-wide scoring averages swell to over 114 points per game these last two seasons. I mean, Elgin Baylor, who was generally an afterthought in this decade, dropped nearly 28 points, 13 rebounds, and 4.5 assists per night on average during these 10
13.4
years.
boards.
Just take a look at this legendary 1961-62 league MVP race, easily the most absurd in NBA history. In this year, Wilt Chamberlain averaged 50 points per game for a full season and threw on 26 rebounds per game for good measure, while playing all 82 games, and due to how many overtime games he was a part of, averaged 48.5 minutes per night.
Man.
What?
Yes, you heard that right.
I mean, I heard the guy was just a freak athlete. You know, he was into track and field and all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, he was just a beast. I don't think he got tired. He played, yeah, he averaged playing the entire game. That's just, I don't even know.
And yes, there were still only 48 minutes in an NBA basketball game back then. In addition to that preposterous season by Wilt, Oscar Robertson averaged 31 points per game, 12 rebounds, and 11 assists that very same season. Hell, even Elgin Baylor averaged 38 points, 19 rebounds, and 4.5 assists. This was all in the same season, and yet none of these players won the MVP that year. And it's important to note that the MVP voting that season, as with every season up until the 1980-81 league year, was not voted on by a panel of biased, know-nothing media jock sniffers. No, it was voted on by the people whose opinions matter most.
Not a bunch of people who are bought and owned by Clutch Media.
The players. And I
the
wonder
players
how
voted?
differently the MVP awards over the last 40 years would look if the players continued to vote on it.
I like
anyway,
that.
in
I
that
like
legendary 61-62 season, it wasn't Wilt's nightly 50 spot or Oscar's triple.
I mean, if the players vote on the MVP, like, you can't buy that. It's not a political thing anymore. Like, you have to be respected. Fierce. I dig that a lot.
Double averages. Nope, the players decided that with the Boston Celtics becoming the first team to that point in NBA history to win 60 games, Bill Russell should be awarded league MVP. And this gets us to the crux of this decade. Wilt Chamberlain was unquestionably the most individually dominant, with a major honorable mention shout out to Oscar Robertson. But Wilt won only one NBA title during this decade.
Man, I've got an Oscar Robinson card somewhere. Not like a real deal one, but one from, I think it was 1990. It was Hoops. It was celebrating 100 years of basketball. It's somewhere in a box around here, man.
While the Big O won none. All of this as Bill Russell was the linchpin of the greatest dynasty in professional basketball history, capturing 8 championships in the decade of the 1960s, and that was while he only played in 9 of the 10 seasons, retiring at the end of the 1968-69
So he went 8 of 9
year. Therefore,
he won eight championships in 9 years. Did I get that right? Fuck. Oh shit.
Russell won 8 championships in the 9 years he
Okay.
played during the 1960s. And
Damn.
that is why, despite Wilt Chamberlain nearly tripling Bill Russell in points scored, while more than doubling him in points per game, while playing more minutes, grabbing more rebounds, and shooting a drastically higher field goal percentage, and also dominating the efficiency acronym metrics that get the writers all hot and bothered today, like VORP, BPM, and PER. Yes, despite Wilt dominating this decade in all of those individual measurables, many believe this decade belonged to Bill Russell. Because at the end of the day, winning matters.
Yeah,
And it
it does.
always has, until, well, most recently. And because Russell won at such an extreme level throughout this decade, he is and likely will continue to be considered the GOAT of the 1960s.
The
And
greatest
while
winner
that
of all
does
time.
conclude our look at the 60s, make sure to subscribe.
Do it. Do it.
And tune in
I wanna be that
for
guy.
the next
Say,
episode
do it.
of the GOAT by decade, when we take a look at the most competitively balanced 10-year span in NBA history, the 70s. Until next time.
Yeah, we're gonna cover the 70s too. We've covered everything other than that, I do believe. So we got one more to go. Man, that was very informative for sorry if that one wasn't nearly as entertaining as usual, but that was like a learning experience. I knew all these names like Elgin, Oscar, um, Russell and Chamberlain, but damn, dude. I didn't know how good Baylor and Oscar really were. That's what I kind of learned off of this. Bill Russell, it's what we thought. He's the greatest winner of all time. Uh, Wilt Chamberlain, had he been a better winner, similar to like LeBron, we'd be talking GOAT. But he didn't get the job done enough times. I don't know. It's really interesting. Who would you guys consider the greatest winner of all time in basketball? Is it Russell? Is it Jordan? LeBron shills? Is it LeBron? Go ahead and say it. I don't care. Uh, I got Bill Russell as the greatest winner of all time. I got Michael Jordan as the greatest player of all time. And if winning didn't matter, Will Chamberlain might have been it. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.